Good Tuesday morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Nexus and North with Greg Cosell. I'm Doug Farrar of USA Today Sports Media Group, and the guy over there in the stripy shirt is Greg Cosell of ESPN NFL Matchup, which is coming back to our televisions very soon. And he's one of the big shot callers at NFL Films, which we all love. And Greg, we, in the last month or so, I know we took last week off for vacation reasons, we've talked about a lot about building the ideal positions or position groups. And I want to get into a subject and a position that's been a lot in the news lately. And it's, you kind of get the same simplistic tropes about it. I want to elevate the discussion about running backs because, you've been in NFL film since 1979. I've been doing this full time for 13 years. So you've seen a lot more of the changes than I have. I want to start this discussion with the requirements for a running back when you started in 1979, say through the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Larry Zonka wasn't really a big deal in 79. His arc had kind of passed, but, there was an era when guys like Larry Zonka and John Riggins were fullbacks, and they were maybe the most important players on their teams. And they're, NFL teams now that haven't had a fullback for 10 years. So before we get into what the running back situation is now in the NFL and all these guys having issues with their teams about it, whether it's Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs or whoever, can you give me kind of a thumbnail sketch of the evolution of the position? And I know it's a lot of years, so it's a big ask.
We'll try to keep it relatively brief.
Yeah, the evolution of the position as you have seen it evolve.
Well, you mentioned that I started at NFL Films in 1979. The following year, 1980, in the NFL draft, George Rogers, a running back from South Carolina, was the first pick in the NFL draft. I would imagine it's probably been a year or two since a running back's been the first pick in the NFL draft.
I have the number. It hasn't happened since 1995 when the
Cincinnati Bengals took. I know who that is.
Yep, Keyjana Carter with the first.
Keyjana Carter, yeah. And prior to that, it went back even a number of years, and it was Bo Jackson.
Yep.
But anyway, back then, the NFL game was totally different than it is today, and the game is very cyclical. You dealt with that in your book very effectively. The game is very cyclical. So back in those days, first of all, offense played in base offense, what we call base offense today. They played with two backs, a tight end, and two wide receivers. Not very often did you even see a third wide receiver on the field. I remember when Bill Walsh started doing that, and I think it was Mike Wilson. He put a third wide receiver on the field, and that seemed a little different, based on the way the game had been played. And defenses, of course, therefore, did not really play with what we now know as nickel corners or slot corners.
Right.
That was not really a position back in the day. It sort of had to become one to some degree when with Air Coryell. But that goes back to, I think, what was his first year in San Diego? 79, I believe it was. 79, right around there.
No, it was 78. I think it
was 78 because he was with the Cardinals from 73 to 77.
And then didn't they fire? I think they fired Tommy Prothro, and he came in. He was like the interim guy.
But I mean, it really took shape in around 79. Right. And then they had three wide receivers, which was, again, not something a lot of teams did back then. It was kind of new and different and therefore very difficult to defend. And they were pretty good ones, too. But anyway.
John Jefferson, baby.
Yeah, Wes Chandler, Charlie Joyner, pretty good receivers.
I know you had that nightmare of a Y ISO tight end in Kellen Winslow.
There you go. That's a whole other story, by the way.
There you go.
Yes, which I dealt with in my book.
Yes.
But back then, the game was really built on base offense versus base defense, being physical. Let's run the football. Let the offense start with the running back. Teams did not throw the ball anywhere nearly as much as they do now. I mean, you can even go back, and I know this is a long way back, but there was a long period of time where everybody wanted to be like Vince Lombardi's Packers in the NFL. The AFL was a different animal. And obviously, when the merger happened, it was gradually over time, things started to change a bit. But essentially, in the NFL, for years and years, everybody wanted to be like Vince Lombardi's Packers because they were winning championships. and Bart Starr was not throwing the football very much. I think in a Super Bowl that the Dolphins won, didn't Bob Greasy throw something like 7 or 8 or 9 or 11 passes?
Super Bowl 8, I think you threw 8 passes. Well, back then you had the pro set. You had 2 running backs in the backfield. Right. You had 2 running backs in your 11 by default. So
that's the way people saw the game, and that's the way people decided that you had to play. And obviously we're not going to get into a whole evolution of the NFL, but that's what the game was for a long period of time. It started to change gradually, and there's many reasons for that. As I said, we're not going to spend a half hour going through all that, but the game started to change, and eventually started to reach the point where teams were playing with 3 wide receivers. Quarterbacks were in the shotgun, which was not. Look, Steve Young was never in the shotgun. You talk to Steve Young, and he says, "Man, I would have loved to have been in the shotgun." He was never in the shotgun.
Because Bill Walsh believed that if you were in a shotgun, 3 things could happen, and 2 of them were bad. I think that was the exact quote.
Well, it's Woody Hayes. If you throw the ball, 3 things. Yeah. So that's the way the game was, and as I said, it gradually changed, and the athletes became better. Certainly, I mean, keep in mind that defensive players back in the day, they were smaller, they weren't as good athletes. The guys who were bigger were definitely not the great athletes that we see today. Just think of the Dexter Lawrences of the world, compared to what you look back, years and years ago. So a lot of reasons for the game changing, but it became much more of a spread game. For years and years, the NFL rejected the college game. But the thing is that you can only deal the hand you're dealt. So these college players, that's where they got the players from. Yep. And these players, in the college game was a little different. And that changed over time too, because I remember researching that Alabama, I think, won the national championship in 1979 or 1980, somewhere around there, and their quarterback threw 100 balls all season, the entire season.
Jeff Rutledge, who I think
no, it was a guy who's not well known, and I can't remember his name now. But he only threw maybe 100 balls. You go to air raid offenses, they throw 100 balls. By the middle of the third quarter of their second game. So everything has changed. Athletes have become better, faster, quicker. The game has become more spread out. Because you want to take advantage of athleticism instead of just making it, a fisticuffs game. And, I think people began to realize that percentage-wise, you have a better opportunity to create big, explosive plays and thus score points by throwing the ball more than by running the ball. And again, this is all very general stuff.
It's so much more about creating and defending explosive plays. I think in previous eras, it was, obviously you had explosive offense, but it really was more about sustaining. Like if we can just grind you down, eventually we will win. Now you got guys like Patrick Mahomes who can score 28 points in 5 minutes. If you sustain, you'll get beaten right out of the stadium. So, that's a big thing too.
Yeah. And there's a definite belief, and it started years ago, not just recently, that it's very, very difficult with the quality of defensive players and the advances in defensive schematics. That's another really important part to this.
Yes.
Because back in the days we were just talking about, there may have been 2 coverages and there weren't a whole lot of blitz packages. So now with the expansion of all that, it's very, very difficult to go 11, 12, 13 plays and score touchdowns. So teams are looking for ways to create what they call explosives, chunk plays, gain 20, 25 yards with one play. You do that twice in a drive and you've gained 50 yards. It's really hard to just line up and run the ball, even with a great running game, if you do happen to have one. It's really hard to, a really good run in the NFL very often, it's a 7-yard run. And that's really hard to do that over and over and over.
So from kind of where we are now and we don't need to go into this situation, running back versus team, because we all sort of know about that. And you and I have discussed this before. We talk about the 2 first-round running backs, and I have the numbers, by the way. There were from 1970 through 1979, there were 44 running backs taken in the first round. In the decade of the 80s, there were 50. 90s, 34. 2000s through 2009, 32. 2010 through 2019, 21. None taken first overall since 1995. So the valuation of the position has changed. What I want to get into, and you and I discussed this a little bit yesterday on the phone, and it got me like really, okay, we need to talk about this. The Lions were pilloried for taking Jahmyr Gibbs with the 12th pick overall. The Falcons took Bijan Robinson, who I think could be the best running back prospect since Adrian Peterson, with the 8th overall pick, but he's still a running back. And the common denominator with those two guys is, yes, they're running backs, but they're also offensive weapons. And it got me thinking about the running backs in the recent past who have run legitimate receiver routes. A Marshall Faulk, a Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell could kick your ass from the slot. I mean, he could just mess you up with all kinds of different stuff. Christian McCaffrey now. So if we want running backs to matter, I mean, blah, 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 is it that they need to become more than running backs? It's more about, how can I, as a running back, create those explosives? How can I create an overall skill set, an overall game to get in on this trend? Because otherwise I'll be like the third linebacker or the fullback. I will be left behind.
Well, I think there's a larger question, a larger issue there, because it goes back to the explosive plays. Now, there's many ways to create explosive plays, obviously. The assumption is that to create explosive plays, you need to spread it out and throw the ball all over the yard. I'm sure if you speak to coaches, some would say, and they wouldn't be wrong, that you can line up in the I formation with your quarterback under center, and you can create explosive plays that way as well with the play action pass.
Sure.
I think, and this is a very nuanced conversation. It's not as easy as saying running backs don't matter. We're talking about running backs because they're not getting paid the way in which some people believe maybe they should, such as the players themselves. So in the minds of
talking about it because it was a position of great import for decades, and now it's just disappearing.
Well, it is and it isn't. At some point, you do need to run the ball. Yeah. And then it depends on your team. I mean, a lot of people point to the Super Bowl with the Chiefs and the fact that they came out in the second half and they ran the ball really effectively with a 7th round pick named Pacheco,
right.
Who's a good back.
Good.
But the point being is that they have the best quarterback in the league, and a quarterback who may be on his way to being one of the best to play. Time will tell. Not every team has that. You mentioned Bijan Robinson. We both agree that he's a big-time prospect for many, many reasons. One reason is because he's a really good runner as well, in addition to the fact that he can detach from the formation and be a very, very good receiver, as can Jahmyr Gibbs, who the Lions drafted with the 12th pick. So,
and when I say receiver routes, just to bust in real quick, I'm not talking about screens and glance routes and little swings.
No, exactly.
We're talking about actual receiver. Like I saw, it was a Bijan Robinson touchdown, kind of a stutter slant against Iowa State. Like if Cooper Kupp runs that, we're talking about it all week, and he ran it.
Right.
And it was a touchdown. It was a great play.
Right. And there's no question that matters more than ever. But to get back to the point that I was trying to make was, not every team has Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or quarterbacks that can, quote unquote, take over a game. Right. So if you're the Atlanta Falcons and you're starting with Desmond Ridder, who I watched his 4 games from a year ago, and you probably did as well, and there was clear incremental improvement by the time he got to his 4th game, but still he's going to be a first-year starter. So what is your offense going to look like? You can't ask Desmond Ridder to do the kinds of things, and I'm not talking about talent, I'm talking about offensive structure and design. You can't ask Desmond Ridder to do the things you're going to ask Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert to do. You can't do that. He's incapable of doing that at this point in his career. I don't know what the future holds for Desmond Ridder, but so now you have to think about, what can my offense be with Desmond Ridder as my quarterback? So you need to run the ball to some degree. That doesn't mean that you line up and hand the ball to Bijan Robinson 35 times a game, but you need to be able to line up and run the ball from multiple looks, multiple formations, multiple personnel packages. So the Falcons need to run the ball. Now, there's a lot of quarterbacks coming into the league now who have tremendous athletic ability, so they provide a run game unto themselves, the Jalen Hurts of the world. And this raises another question.
Well, I was going to say, with the Eagles and the Bears, your best running back might be your quarterback in both cases.
And because of what they do to defenses and how defenses have to align and deal with the quarterback as a runner, you don't need a big-time running back because it's highly schematic. Okay,
Yes.
because the defense has to play a certain way in order to take care of the quarterback. So, the Eagles, Miles Sanders is a very good back, but, the Eagles allowed him to go and signed Penny, and they signed and they traded for Swift. Two good backs, both first-round picks when they came into the league. Both have been plagued by injuries. But you mentioned the Bears. The Bears with Fields, same situation with his running ability. They know what the defense is going to have to do when he's in the gun and the back is offset. So they don't need a back, a big-time back. Hey, it's very possible Khalil Herbert could be their starting back and gain 1,200 yards simply because of how defenses have to play. So that also minimizes the role of a back. Obviously, someone like Jonathan Taylor's in the news now. We would all agree he's a great back. Yep. But they drafted Anthony Richardson, and Shane Steichen is their head coach. He comes from the Eagles, where Jalen Hurts was there. He's going to run a similar offense with Richardson because that's what Richardson's skill set is. He's a dominant runner. He's close to 250 pounds, if not more, and a phenomenal athlete. So he presents a problem for the defense. So you don't need your running back to be a special guy. And therefore, the result of that is you're not going to pay him whatever the number is, 16, 17 million a year, whatever. I don't follow the numbers maybe as closely as you do because you have to write about it, more than I do.
It's a few guys like that and then just falls off a cliff.
Right. So
Christian McCaffrey
that also factors into
Henry, and then it's like,
that also factors in tactically from the running back equation. Someone like Austin Eckler is a very, very valuable player, but the Chargers have Justin Herbert, who ability-wise is a top 3-4 quarterback in the league. And, your offense, because he's that kind of guy, is going to run through him. So your back is going to have to be a receiver as well. And you're not going to give the ball to one back 280, 290 times. So while we would all agree that Eckler is a very good player and a valuable player, the feeling would probably be that you're not paying him $16, $17, $18 million a year because that's not the way you're building your offense.
Right. And, it's interesting. Who had the most of I'm going to give it away with the two positions, halfback or fullback. Do you know which halfback or fullback had the most snaps lined up as an outside receiver last season?
Probably Juszczyk.
Yep, 50.
Yeah.
You know how many targets he had?
See, now, again, but then you get into
two targets. Because if you go back to Patrick DeMarco with the 2016 Falcons with Kyle Shanahan, and that was one of the best offenses I've ever seen, they would run him out and just get that linebacker in stress. They weren't throwing him the ball. I don't think he had a target all season. He was just there to create space for other people. So you can do this different ways, but it's not – I don't know how you bridge this or make running backs, quote unquote, matter. But I think in the overall skill set, like if we're in summary building that ideal guy who can be that tone setter, and Derrick Henry has had 300 carry seasons. Ezekiel Elliott has had 300 carry seasons. So there are guys who set the table. DeMarco Murray not too long ago had 394 carries in one season. So
and Henry last year, people thought he had a bad year, and he still gained over 1,500 yards. And look, again, that's why you go back to 2019 when the Titans made it to the AFC Championship game and were very competitive with the Chiefs. And that their offense was built on Derrick Henry. Everything worked off of him, and they scored over 30 points a game. And any team will take scoring over 30 points a game, believe me. So
doesn't matter how you do it.
Right. So, I think the whole point of this conversation, we could have this conversation for a week, is that it's nuanced. There's a lot of subtlety here. It's not just that backs don't matter. There's reasons why they matter on some teams more than others. There's tactical reasons, as we discussed with the Eagles, and certainly the Colts will fall into that category. The Bears, where the back, it does not matter as much in terms of the talent of the back. He'll still be an important part of the offense and he'll run effectively, but you don't need the best back in the league in order to do that.
You could say the Ravens too with Lamar. When Lamar's healthy, they've cycled through a whole bunch of guys.
Right. And it all depends too on your defense. I mean, a lot of people listening to this might say, oh, well, everybody thought Marshawn Lynch was a great back. Then he retires and Chris Carson, who I believe was undrafted, comes in and rushes for 1,000 yards for 2 or 3 years in a row. And they use that as an example that, oh, well, anybody could line up and run the ball. So there's multiple sides to it. I mean, clearly some backs are better than others. Marshawn Lynch is better than Chris Carson. That doesn't mean that Chris Carson didn't serve a major purpose for what Pete Carroll and the Seahawks want to do. And don't forget, they had a very good defense at the time as well. So there's a lot of things that go into all that. Obviously, if you have a very good defense, you can play multiple ways on offense because you know that when you get the ball back, the score probably hasn't changed. And that really – that can really dictate how a play caller decides to call a game because he knows he doesn't have to score 35 points in order to win. The Seahawks did not have to score 35 points in order to win back 7-8 years ago, as you well know. If
they're kind of thinking they do now, which is why they took they have Metcalf and Lockett. They took Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round. I mean, this is not an 11 personnel team, but it could be.
It wasn't a year ago. We'll see. I mean, I remember the whole conversation when teams would play the Colts with Peyton Manning. And a lot of people would say, well, you want to slow the game down. You want to control the ball. And, and that sounds good as a platitude and a statement. And I'm not saying it's wrong. So the thing is, though, then your defense on that same team where you want to slow it down has to be really good. Because let's say you cut Manning's possessions from 11 to 9. If he scores 4 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns on those 9 possessions, which they often did, by the way.
Yeah, they did.
Then you've got to score 4 or 5 touchdowns. And percentage-wise, you're not going to do that by handing the ball off all game long.
Right.
So there's many reasons why the pass game has superseded the run game. But then, like I said, it depends on your team. I think the Falcons are a good example of that. They're going to run the football. We've seen what the Titans have done. Maybe that's going to change now. We'll see. But look at the 49ers. The 49ers have had a very, very good offense. Obviously, McCaffrey is a different cat than they've had prior to him. But still, he's still a running back, and they're still going to give him the ball in the I formation.
Well, the Falcons are an interesting test case because they have Algier, the guy from BYU, who I thought was like a Marion Barber, just,
power. He did gain 1,000 yards, and people say, well, he gained 1,000 yards. Why do you need Bijan Robinson?
Because Bijan Robinson can then line up all over the place. You can be like Mark Ingram and Reggie Bush, where you don't know. And I've said this before. Reggie Bush, to me, invented the nickel-based defense out of desperation, out of necessity, because when he went from the backfield to the formation, the third linebacker's like, I'm not ready for this. So you have Algier in the backfield, and you have Bijan Robinson lining up all over the place. He can do all kinds. He can do a sweep. He can run a slant. He can run a go. He can run a stutter go. He's a very evolved receiver. So if to conclude this conversation, and as always with our conversations, we could go 3 hours, but it's not in the budget. Would you say that Christian McCaffrey is the closest thing right now to the evolutionary version of a running back? Like the guy you want for the next 5 or 10 years with his skill set? Or how would you codify that in your own mind? Like what is the ideal sort of picture of a running back if you were running a team, like in a not a vacuum of an offense, but sort of an vanilla offense?
Right. Well, if you're an offensive coach, Doug, what you're trying to do is make the defense as predictable as possible, or put the defense in a bad light before the snap of the ball, so your quarterback has a really good feel of what's going on before the ball snapped. And obviously, if you have a back who can line up all over the formation, based on your film study how they're going to line up. It's all probability and tendency, but every team has probability and tendencies. So when you split Christian McCaffrey out against whatever team they're playing, that hey, this is what they're going to do based on our film study. And now you have an answer. You talk to coaches as you do, and all they talk about is we want to have answers. We want to have answers to the problem. And we want to have answers to the problem ideally before the ball snap, because once the ball snap, things happen really fast. So yes, McCaffrey in that sense is that guy. in today's NFL, which is why a Bijan Robinson was drafted 8th. It's why Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted 12th. It's why someone like Eckler, who's a good runner, but not a great runner, but a very, very good receiver who can split out from the formation.
And again, when he's splitting out, he's not running screens from the slot. He's doing all kinds of stuff.
No, so those players have a ton of value because they give offenses answers in today's NFL, and that's what you want for your quarterback. You want to give your quarterback answers. So that's how play callers think about it. But I will end with this. At some point in this league, you do have to line up and run the ball. Somewhere along the line, you do have to do that. People can say in the overall scheme from 30,000 feet, that view that, well, that's not really that important. Maybe if you're just looking at kind of an overview of life in the NFL, but at some point you do have to line up and run the ball. Now, if you want to say you can run it with Chris Carson the same way you can run it with Marshawn Lynch, that's okay. I'm not going to argue, that. But I think when you do want to run the ball, most coaches would probably have a better player as opposed to a player who's not quite as good. So whatever value that means, that's a market thing. That's, I'm thinking tactically. But at some point, you got to run the ball.
Well, as the league develops, and even in the last 5 years, we've seen so many scheme changes and so many conceptual changes. I just think the more you can do, the better off you are. So I don't know if we've solved the running backs matter issue, but Greg, I know you matter, darn it. And another great podcast in the X's and O's pantheon, and we will see you next week, my friend.
God, I feel like we could go on and on with this one, Doug.
I know. It's a lot. Yeah.